Okay, the next video in our series of annual highlights of the very best preserved Type 34s is 1964. And there are a lot of 1964 Type 34s in the world, but this one is one that I personally think is the best preserved one. This is a car that has only 7,000 miles. It's unrestored, original paint, original upholstery. And I've seen it, touched it, so I can verify that. It's an early 64 with chassis number 265,000. So that puts it in the September timeframe of 63. It's owned by a collector named Mike Malamut from Southern California, USA, and it is original Ruby Red and Black, just like this one here, with a monotone silver beige interior, like you see in the middle picture here. The options for a cloth and vinyl combination interior, as well as a different color solid vinyl interior, were available. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So this car was, the original owners of this car was a couple from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Americans, who went to Germany and decided that they loved the Type 34 so much that they bought a pair of them. They brought them back to America, and the husband drove his regularly, but the wife drove hers very little and stored it mostly in the garage. It's this wife's car that we're going to take a look at today. Her car first showed up to the public in 1998 at the Barrett-Jackson auction in Scottsdale, Arizona. It had only 6,500 miles on it, and it sold at $21,500. That at the time was the most paid for a Type 34 in the United States. 6 years later, with 6,986 miles, it was sold again at the 2004 Monterey Classic Auction in Pebble Beach, California, where Mike bought it at $23,650. At today's prices, this would be considered an incredible deal. You can see in the pictures here that it's a very well preserved car. Sealed beam headlights, because it's a USA model, and the rear of it, the previous owner in Colorado had added a round TS emblem where the S emblem should be, unknowingly, but this is not an original Canadian car, which would have the TS emblem. The 64 model series was the first to come out with the S model engine series. That was, instead of a single carbureted engine, they had a dual carbureted engine with high compression that generated 54 horsepower to the previous 45 horsepower. So on the back panel, they added the S emblem. The wheels also changed a little bit. The hubcaps were no longer painted, as you see here, and the thin 9-slot, 8 or 9 slot beauty rings were added to all of the 64s. The round nose emblem, which started in 63, also continued, of course, with the unique rubber packing or plastic packing you can see that sits underneath that emblem to offset it off of the paint. 64 also had the 63 style side view mirror, and that continued through 65. This car, the interior is immaculate, with the exception of an original Blaupunkt radio, which of course it wasn't purchased with. The previous owners put in an AM Bendix radio, which was sold in America for Beatles and Carmen Diaz. So they didn't get a Blaupunkt radio block-off plate or the radio plate for the Type 34 that was more common. You can see here in 64, the straight horn bar was used instead of the half-moon horn ring. and they still had the carryover for the push-button dash controls. Now, this car has the push-button dash control unit in it, and in mid-64 or late 64, this unit was changed out in design for a much simpler pull knob unit that was changing the dash panel with a offset panel area there for the two switches, and you can see that that design really changed from one to the other. So mid-64 was when that changed. The speedometer in 1964 changed as well. Because of the S model motor, you now could go 160 kilometers per hour or 100 miles per hour, and the speedometer reflected that. Previous to that, they were 90 miles per hour and 150 kilometer per hour. Here's the miles per hour version. There are a couple of different versions of this early gauge, and 64 was the last year for the amber needles, like you see in the center speedo here. Underneath the dash is usually a great place to decide whether or not you have a low mileage original car or not, and this one is simply beautiful. All of the details, including the foam wrapping for the turn signal relay, is all there. Beautiful condition, unmolested, just the way it should be. Now in 64 they went with a vinyl two-tone door panel here, different than in 62 and 63 where they had a cloth lower section for that door panel. So 64 is unique in that way, where it has a two-tone vinyl panel. 64 also used the blue dot fresh air knob design for the fresh air in the middle of the dash. This started in 63 and continued through 65. This has original carpet, of course, German square weave, salt and pepper, and the gray rubber floor mats that were used through 65. Interestingly, which is rarely seen these days, the early models had painted upper door areas like you see here, and the later models had a black plastic cap that went over this section. The early painted ones, you can see, had a rubber seal that kept the water channeled away from the inside of the car. This rubber seal that went up over the top, and this one glued down into the center section, was used and implemented sometime in 63, we think. So it's pretty rare to see this rubber piece in position. The emergency brake, you can see, has its original rubber plastic packing here for the carpet piece, and still has its black-gray rubber ring that keeps the opening of this emergency brake handle together. That rubber ring was often broken the first time that the emergency brake got adjusted, and with age deteriorated and fell off. This one is still in perfect position. In 64, the heater controls changed from next to a single rotary knob next to the gear shift lever to a centrally located dual position setting. So you had the rear passenger setting here and the front passenger setting here, and the knobs would slide forward and back versus rotary. This allowed rear passengers to have separate heat than the front passengers, and this heater design here had two different styles. This is the long version of it, and then there was a shorter version of it as well. We can't figure out why there was a distinguishing difference between them, but you can see long version and short version. This is the door panel, the original door panels, in silver beige for the upper section and derby gray for the lower section. And this car came with the solid monotone silver beige seat upholstery, which was an option for the 64 model year. You can see that the other option would be a silver cloth material in the middle of the seats, and this is showing you what that looks like versus the solid vinyl interior. Same derby gray door panels. The rear seat, in this case with solid silver beige, would have been covered with solid silver beige material. So that's a really nice, clean, original rear seat there. On the back C-pillars inside the car, you can see that 64 came out with a set of black plastic molded covers to match the black upper quarter panel pads. Instead of previously to that, they were covered in silver beige vinyl. 64 also began to have the knurled knobs. You can see the knurls here to make it easier to grab the knob. Previous to that, they were smooth knobs. The front end of this, the front compartment, is just beautiful. All original, unrestored, and you can see that in 64, about halfway through 64, because of the dual carb situation with the high compression motors, customers were complaining that the car was pinging and not running well. Well, Volkswagen came out with a solution to that, which was to put a metal plate right next to where the gas filler was and affix a super premium sticker to remind users that the gasoline needed to be high octane to prevent the engine from pinging. This was done away in 1966 when they went back down to a lower compression motor. The front spare tire area of this car is just beautiful. Very, very pristine, like you would expect. With the dual horns set up inside the spare tire area, in 65 that would change to move outside onto the front bumpers. Inside you can see the jack position here where it's clamped into place, and the tip touches this piece of carpet, original square weave carpet, that kept it from vibrating onto the metal. But the inside is just amazing. The dual horn setup looks like it just got made, and the boot is just perfect. Really, really nice setup there. The rear compartment area has the original mats in the back, and you can see down here we have the grates or the grills for the fresh air going into the engine area. That prevented any material that was stored in the back compartment from getting sucked into the engine area. Also in the early years, the dipstick had the oil lettering on the bottom half and the VW logo on the top half of the dipstick. In mid-64 or early 65, they switched that and put the word oil here and the VW logo here to make it easier for people checking the oil that didn't know about Type 34s to know where to fill the oil. Look at this original rear hood seal here, and you can just see how beautiful and pristine this rubber really is. The engine for the car in 64 was a dual carb car. Type 34s had the same engine as the Type 3 notchback and squareback did. This one is an early 64, so it has the bolts here to affix the fan cover. 6-volt generator, early carbs, early distributor, coil location right next to this little piece here. They're only missing the spring, the anti-kink spring here, and a clamp for the air cleaner. But otherwise it's in great shape. So that's our 64 highlight reel. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a little bit about the 64 model year.